Hello everyone, I'm Gosh Malinowski, the Internet of Things advisor and trainer. And today I'm joined by the very special person, a guest that got experience both from the embedded developer side all the way to designing and building IoT solutions using Azure and everything in the middle. Olivier, thank you for joining my invitation. And yeah, let's get started because basically you started as embedded developer and then move all the way to the cloud. So that was pretty long journey. Could you give us some hints how that went and share your experience?
Yeah, well, my pleasure. My pleasure. Well, thanks for inviting me here, Lucas. Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
And I hope we'll get tons of questions about IoT in general and so on. So look forward to that. In my background, my experience, I want to make it short. So I started 2 years ago, out of school. The interesting thing is my choice for my major in engineering school was embedded systems. It was something new. And the idea was to learn about both electronics and software, both hardware and software. And that's what kicked off my career, working on embedded development, understanding systems at the real-time operating level. And then so I did that for 7 years in the industry as a consultant, building telematics, other kind of fun IoT embedded projects. At the time, we were calling that embedded. And then I was hired by Microsoft 17 years ago to be their technical evangelist for Europe, and did that for a few years. Came to the US to join the Windows embedded group, where I have been, working with the product team as well as evangelizing embedded across the world. I went to MS OpenTech for a few years in between my endeavors and my adventure. MS OpenTech was a subsidiary that was created to pave the way for Microsoft to work with the open source communities and with open standards. After a few years there, I joined the Azure IoT team and worked with the team to basically create the entire IoT services on Azure. I was in charge of the SDKs for devices and did that for 7 years. And since March, I'm now a consultant. So people can find me at the address here. And I offer my services in terms of IoT advisory, like you're doing, as well as developer relations, because I know a thing or two about engaging with developers. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, so that's pretty impressive. And this is a question that I'm often asked, how to start the IoT journey and how to become IoT professional. So do you think that people should follow your suit and start from embedded developer and go all the way up? Or nowadays they should start like from top, so the cloud, and go down? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm someone who likes learning new things. So going to the next thing or the next level or is something that is easy for me because I like that. I'm curious and like to discover. I think there's no one rule for how to get started in IoT. IoT is so broad that there's no one way to get started. Lots of people are saying, "Hey, go buy your first IoT device and start coding for it." I would argue that eventually you don't want a hardware to start with. You might want to start with the backend part of it and how you're going to use that data from sensors and devices, and maybe think of it from a more holistic perspective and think about, hey, I want to connect my physical environment with my digital environment, or maybe I want to pull data from some public open source stream of data that will be interesting, weather data or things that are coming from sensors that I can accumulate and I can analyze and display and use for making decisions. So I don't think there's one way to get started. You have to be curious. You have to understand the big picture. That's maybe the one rule. Don't dive too deep into one area. IoT is about sensors all the way up to cloud services. It's super broad. It's huge. And so you will not be able to be an expert overnight. That's for sure, of IoT stuff. Like you and I have been in the industry for a long time, and we've been working on several parts of it. On actual projects, we've been actually coding, architecturing, working on customers' problems. So the big picture is what counts first, and then go with your guts and what you like. Once again, IoT is so vast that you can focus on one area that you prefer. Got friends who really want to become AI experts, but want to stay in IoT. Well, no problem. AI at the edge is a problem to be solved, and so there's lots of work that needs to be done there, and they're digging into that. Other ones are very much focused on hardware and making devices tinier and more robust and more secure, and that's where they're digging. So everything is depending on what people like to do. I'm sure that this is the best way to approach IoT. Like, pick the part that you like, and be curious about what's around.
Yeah, I love your take about starting with hardware. That might be a bit risky because then you can wind up with all those hardware-related details, especially something that is very specific to the board that you decided to start with, right? And that might hammer your ability to see the big picture, right? So
Yeah.
so that's why I totally like the idea that you should try to have that big picture. But at the same time, you should understand constraints of the hardware, right? So, which is kind
Oh
of
yeah.
like a chicken and an egg kind of example, right?
Yeah. It is. I think at the end of the day, but you need to be conscious that these sensors, these devices, they're not your regular PC or server or technology you might be used to work with. These are constrained devices. You are running them in a very often harsh environment. They might have bad connectivity, and so you need to understand all of that. Even if you're building the back end of your IoT app, even if you're building the part that is about harnessing the data and managing these devices, like a very simple example, if you don't understand how a retry logic for sending messages works, and how a watchdog keep alive message works, on the device side of things, well, on the back end, you will never know if your device is connected or not. Is it in a good shape? Is it something that you should be worried about or not? You need to understand what's going on the other side to be able to develop the right logic in your application. And in IoT devices, the IoT realm is such that you have a huge load of additional constraints that you don't have in a mobile environment or in a web/server environment or cloud environment. So that's what's really different about IoT, I think.
Yeah. So that actually reminds me a story of mine that I created a DDoS attack on my own backend system because of that retry logic. And here comes the experience. Like you need to screw some things up to get that knowledge, right? Because no one will tell you that. Like you want to get that insights from university. Probably you won't get that insights from books. At least
Mhm.
most of books that I'm aware of, right? You need to have your hands dirty and have the end-to-end visibility in the system that you're building, so you can understand what works, what does not work, and then you can fix them
Yeah.
on flight, right?
True. And there's something to say also about IoT. I would say IoT is not for all. IoT is as in industrial, professional, enterprise IoT. You might be interested in tinkering around with hardware and building your own little, greenhouse for your house, or way of managing your home the way you want to manage it, or create your, garden systems. And that's fine. That's fine. There are a huge load of additional things to think about when you want to go enterprise professional, do that for a living, right? Because the project you start with your Raspberry Pi or Arduino device will not translate to enterprise or industrial or retail or the industry in general that easily. It will translate. What you learn there will translate, but it will take maybe some not so interesting load of things to learn and be conscious about. One thing though, when you're building your own project, you care very much about the customer needs, which are yours. You have a scenario in mind, you want to achieve something, and you're focused on that, right? And you're tinkering around, yes, but it's because you're serving yourself as a customer. IoT is no different. Enterprise IoT or industrial IoT is no different from any other industry. You need to think about the customer's needs first. You need to understand them. And this is where IoT can get tricky, because if you're a software person, if you're a hardware engineer, if you're a data scientist, all people working on IoT projects, you might not be a farmer, you might not be an operator in a factory floor, you might not be someone working on welding metals together. These people, these engineers, these operators, they have an understanding and experience that you don't have. And so you need to try and understand that. What is their needs? Ask questions and focus on not on telling them, hey, this is the best technology to use, you have to do that. Try and understand how it's going to serve them. Where is it adding value? Because for them, it's in the way. They kind of understand they need to digitalize, they need to connect their things, they need to have that AI thing come into play. But it's not their domain. And so you need to make sure that you understand them before you try and force any sort of IoT technology on them, because that will not work at the end of the day. If your solution, if what you're developing is not fitting the customer's needs and requirements exactly, that will just not work. So that's something that I personally think you have to be like that in all industries, but IoT is even more true than all the others. You have to be customer obsessed and focused. Otherwise, your IoT solution just does not work and serves no needs and costs a lot of money for nothing. And so that's something that, to me, is common to all the successful IoT services providers or platforms out there. The ones who care about the customers first are the ones that will be successful.
Cool. Well, okay, let me just stop you for a second and unpack your answer, because you pointed to multiple extremely important topics that might be relevant to the audience. So you mentioned the Raspberry Pi and doing some in-house project just for fun, right? And then you said about the domain knowledge that is specific to some industry, which is not IoT, because IoT is not industry by itself, right? But to domain knowledge of the customer. And I've got pretty strong opinion on that. So I believe that if we want to be an IoT expert, we should learn our lesson like before facing the customer. So we should know how to design at least the technical solution, the technical backend, the edge, right? We should know how to secure all of that stuff, how to connect it, how to transfer data. Because during the commercial project, you won't have time to learn all of those technical details, right? Because you will have to catch up with the domain knowledge of your customer. That most of the time you won't have no clue about their business, right? So this is something that I think is extremely relevant. And you mentioned that, but I wanted to underline it for the audience, that you should do your homework before going to the enterprise, right? Because you will learn all the time anyways if you want to be in the IoT domain. So
Agreed.
Do as much as possible before and be open-minded. Do not force like your customer to use some technology that is not relevant to them, right?
Exactly. And Lucas, I think at the end of the day, it's true of all the domains, not just about IoT. If you don't develop a solution that is crafted for the customer based on their needs, you will not be successful. But I think IoT is even more so than other domains. I'm not saying that you don't have to understand the need of a customer when you're building a website, for example. Right? If the website is not serving the customer needs, it's useless. It will not achieve the goals that the customer is paying for. And so you need to understand what they're doing. The difference between an e-commerce company and a website designer, the gap is less profound, I would say, than between software developers and a farmer, or software developer and a miner, software developer and an industrial operator on a factory floor. So the gap between your customer, your final customer, and you, or you're standing with your technology as an expert, as an engineer, is deeper and larger than in most industries out there. That's the thing. But it's not easier, and it's not, I would say, less important in other industries to understand the customers. It's common to all the domains, but IoT is harder, I think, and requires more curiosity, more envy to go serve that customer than in most other industries, in my view.
Totally. That's why I often say that IoT is not about technology, right? We use technology as a tool, right? But we need to understand the customer, and most of the time, customer is not someone from IT space at all, as you said, like,
Oh yeah.
right? Farmer,
Yeah.
they don't really care about that. And that's why I always push back if I read some news, let's say on LinkedIn, that some device got compromised, but
Mhm.
the vendor claims that that was the end user who was supposed to change the password. And I always push back, like, why the end user should care about that in the first place? Like, it's you who put the admin password, and now you're claiming that it's not your fault, right? So I think this is not the customer obsessed mindset that you presented.
I'm with you. I think there is the notion, and I think home automation is something that is in a way hurting IoT because there's so many vendors pushing out gizmos and things that don't really add a lot of value in the realm of home automation. And they're not well done. And they're costing consumers money. They think they are getting something that's going to be useful for them. But after they use that for a month or two, they stop using it. It doesn't work anymore. It's hard to connect. And it's very often a security gap in their home network because they don't know what to do to really secure these things that by default come too generic to be secure by default. And so I think this domain is hurting us. I'm glad that some companies are doing it right, but that's something that is building a perception. And we had these cycles in the news for last few years about, hey, IoT is not secure and these devices have been hacked and that compromised that amount of data and so on. Well, yeah, this was IoT not done properly, and that's something that you need an expert to help you go from your prototype built with that consumer device off the shelf to getting an actual solution that will serve your purpose, your needs, and that will be embedded into your equipment, that will be a transparent, I would say, technology that just works and that you don't have to maintain or go debug or secure yourself as a user, as an operator. Operator needs to use the tool. I like to compare technology to physical tools, right? The worker, the carpenter, for example, if they have to build their own tools to do their job, they're wasting time. But when they want to grab a tool, they want to trust it's going to work, it's going to be safe to use, and it's going to give them value, bring value, right? So if you have a manual saw, it's not the same as having an electrical one. However, if the electrical one is always not working or is dangerous, well, the guy will be better off using the manual one, right? And for some jobs, and you want to cut a little tiny thing, you don't need the electrical one. The power tool might be overkill for some jobs, and you want something more precise. And so you need the right tool. But you need, as an operator, as the user, not to have to repair your tool, fix your tool, enhance your tool, secure your tool. That should be features of the tool itself, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
totally, totally. And I think that we, as the IoT in general, still struggle from creating the products on the one hand easy to use and generic, and on the other hand secure and doing what they're supposed to do, right? Because the onboarding process of most of our home devices is pretty painful, right?
Mhm.
And that's is a struggle, and it gives me a really good segue to my next question. So, how do you perceive the overall maturity of the Internet of Things space? Because you've been here long enough to see how it evolved.
Yeah.
So, what's your take? Like, are we heading in the right direction, even, or we are just doing some random experiments here and there?
I think the answer is in between. I think that yes, IoT as a collection of technologies is getting to a level of maturity that I would say it's becoming mainstream because there is a need for it, because it's done properly here and there. And but that said, it is ever evolving. Like many modern technologies, they are ever evolving, getting more features, more functionality. And so it's something that will require people to always learn about it. One thing though, is that IoT applies to domains that very often have long life cycles. An application on a mobile device is obsolete after a few months, right? And the user, especially in the consumer space, will go into another one. Or, in the enterprise world, yes, the application, can have a longer lifespan, but you need to add more functionality because you have a very competitive space, and you need to bring on more functionality, features, and so on to your enterprise tools and applications. But IoT is something that, in many scenarios, is going to be deployed on a device. It's going to be on a machine, on an equipment, on an asset for some time, and very often has a dedicated functionality, and will be running for the next 10 years, 20 years, sometimes 30 years in factory floors. And so you need to make sure the piece of software you put in there is robust. And in that, eventually, you have an infrastructure so that you can maintain that in a secure, safe way. And I think we're there. The technology exists. The technologies exist. And I do believe that IoT is, I don't like the word mature. It's not that it's mature. It's in production. It's used. And it's necessary because we're at the era where we need even more data than before. The rise of AI and the big push these days on everything, AI, LLMs, and so on, well, all of that is fed with data, and data is coming from the environment around us. And most of the environment data is generated by sensors powered by IoT devices. And in IoT, you have this internet part, which is about connecting these devices so that that data can be collected where it's going to be used. That said, there is so many people that do IoT bad because they, go through the shortcut because they want to be on market fast, and we see a new IoT platform popping up every other day, and it actually will take some time for that to get naturally, I wouldn't say sanitized or cleaned up, but sorted out. Customers will identify the vendors, the integrators, and so on that work best for them. They will also identify the way of implementing IoT that works best for them. I've seen, like many industries, I like this concept of pendulum, trying something that is in one direction and then suddenly, well, it doesn't work. Let's go the opposite way. And then realize that the opposite way doesn't work either. So we need to find something that is in between. And then the pendulum does that and ends up, okay, that's the right way of doing this thing. And so IoT is the same, where it's been a lot about everything on the devices, intelligent devices. Suddenly, we can connect them to the cloud. Everything in the cloud. Let's push everything to the cloud, and things will happen there. And now it's all about, wait a second, actually connectivity, storage, compute is expensive up there. We might not need to send my temperature data from my sensor every second up to the cloud. And so there's this notion of edge compute, there's this notion of analytics at the edge, bringing AI down there. And so I think IoT is like many or different areas of IoT are like that. They are still in that pendulum movement where we are still deciding which way is the best. But in many places, many areas of IoT technologies, I think we are in a pretty stable place. And there will still be evolution, enhancements, and new things. But to me, IoT is in production. It's no longer about tomorrow's technology or the buzz thing, right? And by the way, do we need a buzzword like IoT for it? That's debatable, right? So we claim we are IoT experts because that helps people identify the collection of technologies that we understand and can help them with. But at the end of the day, is it really IoT still, or something else?
I'm with you on that one. Like I used to say that IoT used to be the buzzword, but right now it's in a production, so it's not fancy anymore because it just works, or at least it should just work, right?
Yep.
And what you said about the shortcuts in IoT, I believe this is extremely tricky, right? Because I see even my customers, like they ask us to make some shortcuts, and I always try to give them, the big picture. Okay, we can do that to save time and money, but it will hurt you in the long run. So are you really know what you're doing, and are you fine with the consequences? And luckily, if you educate people, they then decide that taking shortcuts is not probably the best way, because it's not worth the money that you can save in a short period of time, right? Speaking about time, let's take us into the future, because you help also with the industrial metaverse strategy. And I like to say that IoT is the technology behind the metaverse because it basically connects the physical and digital world together, right? So let's take us to the future and let's explain the concept of industrial metaverse and your take if we are there yet, if we are just trying to understand the concept and the implication of the technology.
Definitely. And there's a comment from Chris. We're saying that IoT might not be that fancy anymore. And Chris is saying, hey, fancy is industrial IoT. And yeah, well, some kind of fancy. Actually, I would argue, Chris, that industrial IoT is certainly one of the domains of IoT that is the most mature, right? As in maybe the less fancy out there. That's the one that we in our little domains or circles we talk a lot about. But I want to say it's fancy. I think actually industrial IoT is the one that is the most in production of all.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's most in the
IoT.
production, and
But
it's the least fancy, to be honest, because in production, in industrial IoT, like especially the OT guys, so the operational technology people, they don't really up to experimenting with the production lines, right? They want to have everything nice and steady and doing what they're supposed to do.
better.
So,
Better.
like, yeah, so I would say that the industrial IoT is as far from being fancy as possible. And as close to getting job done as we can, basically.
But yeah, and so Chris is bouncing back, but industrial metaverse, that's the fancy one. And I agree with you, Chris. Industrial metaverse is a fancy word. I mean, at the end of the day, the term metaverse has been used a lot lately, and we're starting seeing what I call the visible part of the iceberg. And the pun is intended. It's only the visible part of the iceberg that we're seeing when we look at the meta technologies, when we look at HoloLens, when we look at what Apple just announced recently. This notion of interacting with the digital world is just part of it. Industrial metaverse is about digitalizing, creating a digital replica of the physical world. And when we say industrial, it's not just manufacturing or industrial automation. That extends to other domains like retail, like real estate, smart buildings, and others. And the idea is not just to be able to interact with a visual representation of this physical world. It's to actually have software AI applications being able to make sense of the physical world through its digital replica. And so the notion of industrial metaverse to me is fed by a concept which we call digital twins. Digital twins is a set of technology, once again, that is about creating models for the things and connecting the real world, the real things, the IoT part, to that digital version of it. And this digital version is described not just in terms of its capability and its parameters and its data, it's also defined by its relationship with other things, right? And so when you create a model for a thing, you can go from that one twin to a bigger twin that contains several. And Chris is reacting. How's that different from digital twin? Actually, it is built around digital twins with that layer, which is the industry layer, which is the domain specific layer. Right? When you have smart buildings, you have a notion of ontology that is about the way you're describing your buildings, your rooms, and so on. Well, you map that into a digital twin platform that knows how to organize the data in the form of models and twins, and then has a powerful graph that will allow you to query that data in an intuitive and efficient way. Right? That's what the industrial metaverse is. It's the application of digital twins plus IoT plus AI to industrial domains with specific knowledge, with specific applications. And to me, yes, industrial metaverse is a buzzword, but it's built on existing technologies, on technology that are available today and that are in production. Digital twin services, IoT for connecting and harnessing data from devices, AI, all of that connecting into business applications. So it's something that is also a reality. maybe not as, I would say, advanced as IoT itself, but IoT contributes and participates in building this industrial metaverse that, at the end of the day, it's a fancy word for describing what we all are working on, which is building a digital replica of or let's say a twin of the physical world so that we can interact with it. The notion specific to industrial metaverse that is very interesting is the ability to predict, the ability through that model and digital replica of the real thing that is as close as you want to the physical world. You can do simulations, you can do predictions without impacting directly the physical world. So you can test this, for example, there's going to be a failure or when there's going to be a failure on a conveyor belt or on a robotic arm in a factory floor without having to stop the actual production line. You can fast forward in your digital version, adding more parameters from the virtual environment to stress the equipment by having this being a twin, a digital twin, and see when it's going to fail and how it's going to fail. And this is a very interesting and certainly one of the most looked into use case for the industrial metaverse. Once you have a digital replica that is as twinish, I would say, as resemblant to the physical world, now we're talking. Now we are in a place where we can do all these predictive maintenance scenarios. We can implement all these scenarios that were not possible until now, or that were requiring so much data to be analyzed after the facts that you could barely do predictions. You could be eventually fixing some potential issues, but not go all the way down where we can go today, I would say.
Yeah, I think you've got great point there that the industrial metaverse is just a platform that utilize the digital twins, right? And digital twins are just some kind of abstractions that are fed by the IoT technology, so they are connected to the physical world and to represent that physical world as closely as possible. Yep. So yeah, I think that's great point, especially for everyone that wants to enter this domain. To create that structure, right? The IoT is just, the foundation, like the technical foundation, and we've got some higher level abstractions, like those digital twins, which are just some virtual objects at the end of the day, and we've got the metaverse that is basically yet another abstraction that encapsulates digital twins, add some AI capabilities, add some additional ways to work with data, to visualize that, but the visual is just one of the layers, right? And it's not the most important one. What is the most important one is to taking the data and actually extracting knowledge from data, right? And we can extract knowledge from data using various of tools.
And I have a good example for that, which is, when we talk about metaverse, industrial metaverse, very often the visual of that is someone on a factory floor wearing a very expensive augmented reality device and working around the factory floor and interacting with like gauges and so on. Well, at the end of the day, I can bet that any operator on the factory floor will not want to wear a heavy stuff on their head added to their helmets to roam around their factory floor. It's heavy, it's uncomfortable, especially all day long, and it restricts the view. So from a safety perspective, might be a no-no. And very often what they need is a very clear information. So sometimes, they have a phone or a tablet in the pocket, they can bring it up, and now they have the augmented reality on that little screen there. They don't need to wear that augmented reality device, right? And sometimes what they need is a SMS that tells them that conveyor belt is going to fail tomorrow. You need to change, something or go recalibrate that thing. And that's all they need. And that's their industrial metaverse interface. That's an SMS, right? That could be as simple as that. From the operation manager perspective, it could be that there's an automation that created a ticket for the maintenance of that specific thing at a customer's, and that it is synchronized with the data from the schedule of the maintenance team with the schedule of the actual production lines, and finds automatically the right time to go do the maintenance when it's not going to disrupt production, and when you have the right maintenance person available. And that's industrial metaverse scenario, because it's about bringing the information in context, like information from lots of different sources, actual hardware, blueprints, schedules, whatever, customer relationship management tool, and you put all of that together, and now you have a simple query on that graph that allows you to have that information you need. And eventually you have an app that will automatically create the ticket, schedule for the maintenance, notify the customer that they should expect someone to come up on that schedule there, and for that thing to be done without any stoppage in production, without any damage incurred, with a very simple mechanism and system. And so that's, to me, an even better example than the guy roaming the factory floor with the goggles and doing click on a visual. So that's my perspective on industrial metaverse. It's not so fancy, is it?
Yeah, well, it needs to be fancy in order to sell, right? But at the end of the day, like as you said, the operators, they don't care about all of those fireworks. They just want to have the job done. And the example that you gave with the simple SMS notification, that's the essence of it, right? Like the simplest possible solution that satisfies the business need. This is the way that I believe we should design.
We're back to what we were saying at the beginning. You need to care about the customer needs. How do they operate? If you give them a solution that doesn't work with the way they are operating today, even if it's like, you can propose something that is modernizing the way they operate. Okay, fine. But if they cannot use what you're proposing to operate on a day-to-day basis, well, they will just not adopt it. That will not work for them, and that will not add the value they're looking for, right? And so at the end of the day, if you don't think first about what your customer needs are, well, you're not in a good place. And one thing I was telling you, while we were preparing, is that and I'm sure you're doing the same, when I'm advising a customer who are getting started in a digital transformation journey, they're started. They know they need to start harnessing data from sensors, and because they know they have limits. They realize that eventually that super experienced employee is going to leave soon, and they have the knowledge, and we need to figure out a way to, replace that person when they retire. And so they realize that they need to digitalize. They realize that they need to gather information from different sources and make something out of it. But my first question to this kind of customers is really, my set of questions, I would say, is about, what they're trying to achieve. What is really, going to happen once we have this connectivity of devices, sensors added, whatever. Because very often I realize that, well, wait a second, you don't need all the shebang. You don't need all the, back end that will manage and all the data up in the cloud. And maybe you're better off with like a simple low-run infrastructure, all local, a little box there in your farm, in the house, and you're going to have all your sensors sending data out locally, and you can do the analytics locally. You don't need to have a cloud connectivity, for example. So I really usually tune down the excitement of my customers, unfortunately, but for good reasons. They don't need all of that. Very often, they have a very specific problem they want to solve, and they've been reading around or told by someone that, hey, you need all the thing there. Like, no, you don't need all of that. I was like talking to that person working on some project I cannot share details about, but in a nutshell, they were planning to send a temperature sensor data up to a cloud every second. And I was like, wait a second. Well, first, you don't need to send it every second. You need to send it when it changes. Because most of the time it will not change, right? It's going to be super steady. So you're going to send it when it changes. But what you need to think about is the fact that you need to make sure that data arrives in the cloud when it changes. So the scenario and the approach was totally different than, I'm going to send every second, and if I stop receiving it, that means something is wrong. No, maybe everything is right. The thing, though, is that you need to think about it differently than, the typical IoT project of my data is there, I'm sending to the cloud is doing analytics, and it's going to make a decision and send a command. That does not always work the same way. And so you need to really think about the problem of the customer and provide a solution that responds to that problem and that matches the way they operate, the way they do business, to really add value there.
Okay, so speaking about customers, how customers can find you and contact you to basically get your knowledge and insights?
So they can find me at obtechconsulting.com. That's my my company, OB like Olivier Bloch, techconsulting.com. So I also have an IoT show on YouTube that you can find as well on the website. All the information is there, and I'll be more than happy to help you whether you're looking for some help understanding what is IoT and how it can help you, or if you're already embarked in that digital transformation journey, help you with your technical choices, your architecture. You might already have a proof of concept. You want to go to production. You don't know where to start, what to remove, what to add, which platforms to pick when it comes to a cloud option, and which partners to work with. Which part should you do yourself versus go buy and integrate a solution. So all these questions, I'm more than happy to advise on and help you with. The other aspect is developer relations. If you're building a platform, something that has APIs, that has SDKs that are used by a developer to be integrated into their own broader solution, you need to consider developers as your audience. You need to consider them as your target customer, and I can help you with that as well, with technical content strategy and so on.
Perfect. So thank you very much, Olivia, for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you. And I do believe that the audience got tons of value from your experience. So
I appreciate the invitation, and I really enjoy, sharing what I've learned, which is a little of what the broader IoT thing is about. And all together with people like you, Lucas, we're learning a lot. And I appreciate this kind of chat. So, whenever you need me, I'll be here for another one.
Yeah, that's the great summary. So if you consider being IoT professional, just prepare for keep learning all the time, because there is no point in time that I will say, okay, yeah, we've got it all, we've got it covered. It won't happen. So if you do not like learning and pushing yourself, then just find something else to do. And on that note, I thank everyone for joining. My name is Łukasz Malinowski, the Internet of Things advisor and trainer, and together with Olivier, I believe that we shared a bit of insights of how it is on the other side once you actually start that professional IoT journey. All the best for you, and till next time.
Take care. Bye.